England Take. I'm AJ Kierstead. NewEnglandTake.com to get more from the show. It's a Substack. You get every episode in your inbox. Thank you to WKXL for picking up the show. Saturdays, 8:30 a.m. Concord and Manchester. NHTalkRadio.com to get more what that awesome station's doing. Locally owned, which is always awesome to support. Thank you to thegranitegrok.com and Concord TV also for picking up the program every week. Be sure to visit PorcupineCoffeeRoasting.com for awesome specialty roasted coffee right here in the Granite State. Amber does a fantastic job sending them every month to your inbox. It's a private membership organization, and every month it's a different roast, and I think I've been doing it for 6 months now. I've not met one that I was not a fan of. It's fantastic stuff. PorcupineCoffeeRoasting.com. You'll use code NETAKE for 15% off your order. PorcupineCoffeeRoasting.com. Excited this week to be joined by a first-time guest, a very relevant guest, considering all the headlines that have been taking up all the oxygen in the room the last 48 hours. We're recording this on Thursday, July 9th in the evening. This is a very fluid situation, which we'll talk about a bit. But today I'm going to be joined by Kristina Parker. She's the communications director with the Maine Grand Ole Party, the Maine Republican Party. Welcome to the show. Yeah, definitely. So, the Graham Platner. I've been talking about Graham Platner and everything that is terrible about him as a human being, his politics and everything of that nature. It's kind of a big symbol of what's wrong with the Democratic Party, and they're being lost at sea with Trump getting reelected and things of that nature. I honestly didn't think it was going to get as bad as it got with Platner. Were you as floored as so many others were?
Well, so you said you've been talking about it for a long time. I feel like I've been talking about Graham Platner for forever. He announced his candidacy, I think, in August of 2025, and we immediately framed him as Maine's Mom Donnie. And the first thing we found out about this guy was that he was Democratic Socialist. And then, the floodgates open. We find out that he has a Nazi tattoo. And obviously that's very disconcerting. And you think that would have been enough, actually, for him immediately to drop out. But a lot of Maine Democrat leadership didn't even bat an eye to that. And then there was more and more. So I think that the shock started to wear off, even though the things that he was saying and the things we were finding out about him were getting more and more egregious, just because, if the guy's got a Nazi tattoo, what else? If he's going to say, why don't black people tip, what else? If he's going to insult Teddy Daniels and other U.S. soldiers, I wouldn't put much else past him. So obviously the most recent news coming from the Politico and the New York Times article is shocking because it's horrific. But at the same time, it's are we surprised that the guy with the Nazi tattoo is a bad dude?
Yeah, there should be zero shock about any of this. I mean, he's been a sketchball his entire life. One of the things that was constantly rightfully put in his face is someone who's been marketing himself as this blue-collar dude when he was put into a private prep academy that he got promptly kicked out of, if I remember right, within just a few weeks. He didn't make it through that as it was. He's went off in the military, obviously. Grateful for anyone that puts service in the military, but it does cause issues for a lot of people, and he was prone to continue to have issues. Got out, allegedly was going to be this socialist soldier and was going to change the world, and then decided to be a military contractor. So he left it and then went back in. Not terribly unusual. Kind of screws with the image a bit.
Well, and so let's plug in this quote. And just as a side note here, if Graham Platner said it on Reddit and there's a news article about it, I've heard about it at this point. As the communications director for the Maine Republican Party, I've been talking about this stuff for weeks on end, going on the radio, doing interviews. One of the quotes being, I got older and became a communist. And then also, as soon as I got out of the military, I stopped believing in that patriotic nonsense. So there's two quotes to kind of go along with that timeline for you. Those are some of the things that he said at that time.
Yeah, great thing you want in someone that's going to be senator is a quote of that nature. Just fantastic. In addition to everything else that's been coming from his time on Reddit, which does date back several years, but it wasn't something that happened 30 years ago. This is just within the last decade, a lot of it. Talking about being looking forward to the chance to do certain adults against their will actions against home invaders. Let's put it that way. We are a broadcast radio show for that reason. Yeah, exactly. We don't need the FCC phone call, which is inherently sets his own standard of not taking seriously that action, which kind of leads to the further allegations that have most recently really been brought to light by the New York Times. I mean, I can understand that. I'm no fan of the New York Times, generally speaking. But I can understand why they didn't run with this person that Politico ran. And the fact Politico ran with it really was the straw that broke the camel's back. There's no way around it. There is no evidence. There's a lot of sketchiness when it comes to that. Just give full benefit of the doubt to, or not even benefit of the doubt, just full honesty with regards to the situation. The political story lacks evidence. It's entirely one person's story. There's no messages really to speak of. It's this one person's story with other people saying that, yeah, things happen, but no real specifics. It's an extremely, on the other side, it's an extremely hard thing to get evidence for something that happened 5 years ago of this nature.
Well, so I'm just gonna stop you there because there is
Yeah.
actually evidence that they didn't put into the articles. And so me not being a fan of the New York Times, ever since that article came out, and then also since the Politico article came out, Miss Jenny and then also Mrs. Fifield both have come out and said that they provided ample evidence. They probably 5x what they actually ended up putting in those articles. And those particular journalists and those news outlets decided not to use the evidence that they provided. So it's not that the evidence wasn't there. It's just that we hadn't seen it and they decided not to use it. And, there's multiple reasons why they could have decided not to do that. But both of those women have come out and said, hey, I did provide these things to those reporters and they were not used in the articles, which maybe what some people see as making the story weak, but at the same time, I don't think it's that weak of a story. Some people just might see it that way.
And generally speaking, this is the party that it was the believe all women through the Me Too movement. This is the party that has specifically said everything that's wrong with like the majority of their issue they have with Trump are his personal life and the way he talks about people and his interactions with women, his marriages and things of that nature. One of the biggest stories that kicked off a lot of the rebuke against Trump was the grab them by the P word and the bus and things like that were really it. Meanwhile, we have everyone surrounding this individual that is hugely problematic, if not just as much, possibly more than Trump. Trump is a useful politician, and for me personally, as a more libertarian-leaning individual. But it really goes to show the hypocrisy of the progressive left, where it doesn't matter how terrible the idol is that they're putting up of a politician, so long as they have the right policies or ideas that they want to push forward, which are, Platner literally said it himself, communistic, socialistic. There's no one to see advantage with him having all this Reddit crap online, is he literally said all these things out loud, mask off, and it's this weird glossing over it, but also saying I'm happy that he's this way is so weird.
And I think a better example of the hypocrisy would be that the New York Times article, they were writing it off as she's a Republican political operative, which, first of all, gross that you're not going to believe a woman just because she's a Republican political operative. But it's not even true. She worked on Nikki Haley's campaign 2 years ago, I think, for a very brief amount of time. So it's not that great of a claim. And Democrats did not rescind their endorsements after that New York Times article. They only did it after the Politico article dropped. And as Ms. Jenny said in that article, is that she actually does agree with Platner policy-wise, but she couldn't stand by and watch his character not be truly shown, and that's why she did that article. So it was when a Democrat came out and said that, there's something wrong with Graham Platner, only then is when they started to rescind their endorsements. And I think that's a pretty good example of the hypocrisy that's coming from the Democrat Party in this particular issue.
In looking at his campaign staff, he turned over his staff at least 3 times over the span of a year, which is unheard of. These are expensive people, generally speaking, that you need to have on your campaign that are making investments, setting the mission forward for what you're going to be doing, especially with Platner was in the field a lot. I mean, sincerely, is a grassroots.
Was talking to people a lot. That is,
Yeah,
I guess I could give him credit for that.
exactly. It's like the one good thing.
I guess these staffers spent time with him and decided, oh my gosh, like I don't want to be on this train anymore. I'm getting off. And like good for those guys
Yeah.
for recognizing that and aborting ship because they don't want to be associated with Platner because they realized who he really was.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, ultimately, it's now done. He's officially dropped out. It came through either early this morning or it was last night. He did have a long message. If you really want to hear his side of the story, you can. It's on all the social media platforms. You can watch it. He just speaks
You're
with
really
his.
bored.
If you're really bored and you want to hear a gravelly, exhausted sounding voice for that amount of time, have at it.
The fear in his eyes. I think that's the first time I've really seen Graham Platner be anything but angry. Like he was angry, but at the same time he looked kind of fearful, and he had almost recognized like this absolute seriousness finally of the situation that he has gotten himself into over and over and over again in his life. Because he also has not only a track record for saying these absurd, abhorrent, disgusting things, but also for making bad decisions and being bailed out by whether it's his family or other people in his life or kind of just lying about it and getting away with it. And now what we're seeing is he is not getting away with it anymore. And I wonder if it's a bit of a reality check, a bit of a slap in the face for Platner for once at whatever 40 years old.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so, because ultimately the whole campaign was set up on a lie. As this blue collar oyster farmer who, by the way, most people still don't realize this, his primary client was his mother's restaurant. He was not doing this, he was not some free market oyster fisherman out there putting product on the market. He ran a private oyster farm for his family's business, and that's what it was. So it's once again mommy and daddy keeping this guy going when he's doing these atrocious things. And set up just to reinforce the timeline. He was married and was immediately sending messages approaching other women to cheat on his wife, like almost immediately, which is the reason why one of the staffers dropped out early on, because this stuff was coming out. And it's just it was an utter catastrophe waiting to happen. Bad politics. You can even as all the bad policy aside, from a political perspective, like this is just, what were you guys thinking?
Originally, and this is something I wrote a newsletter earlier this week out to our email list, that I basically said at first I didn't like him because he was a socialist, and it's like I don't agree with those policies, and that's why I think he's a bad candidate. But the reality is like, who cares that he's a communist now that we know that he has pretty credible alleged rape and domestic violence cases. I mean, the Nazi tattoo, the disrespect of U.S. veterans, the disrespect of Black people, the disrespect of white people, white rural folks are racist and stupid is something that he said. He said that lobstermen are drug addicted POS. Like the list goes on and on of everyone he's disrespected, and it's at the point where I'm like, I don't like that you're a socialist, but that's nothing compared to how much I dislike you because of all these other things that you've done as a person, regardless of your policy as U.S. Senate candidate.
100%. I mean, it's the reason why Bernie is as terrible and evil as his politics are, generally speaking. It's like, oh, it's Bernie. He's entertaining. He's Bernie. He's gonna do his commie thing, and we're gonna giggle about it. So it'll be interesting. I mean, going forward now, I mean, it's now a free for all. The Democratic Party, I believe, is saying that they're gonna essentially we're gonna do a repeat of what happened when Biden dropped out, where the party selected the new person. And are any surprise that Shanna Bellows immediately saying, "I'm in"?
Shady Shanna. That's what we call her. I just made a post about that. Shady Shanna is in. Troy Jackson is in. Jordan Wood is in. Paige Loud. These are all people that I'm familiar with because they just recently lost the Democrat primary for whether it was Congressional District 2 or Maine governor. I was sitting in the Secretary of State's office until I think it was 1 or 2 a.m., 10 days after the election had ended, waiting for these results to come out, and they all lost. Hannah Pingree and Matt Dunlap got the nomination, and these are the people that Maine Democrats chose not to nominate for high office in the state of Maine, and now they're trying to run for Graham Platner's seat. So there's that issue with it. But also, Troy Jackson and Shanna Bellows both were endorsed by Graham Platner and endorsed Graham Platner. And they've obviously since rescinded those endorsements, but only after the most recent article. So they were basically, if we're doing the math, okay with everything that came up before that and everything that happened before that. So it's a really tight pickle to be a Maine Democrat right now because, the party is a mess. This nomination convention, I think, is also going to be a mess. There's no structure, security, or stability in a free for all. It reminds me of a bar fight versus like an organized cage match, like an organized wrestling match, where it's like you put these two guys in the ring, you have some rules for mixed martial arts versus, hey, we're all in the bar and I want to see who comes out on top. A bunch of losers
Uh,
hanging out at dive bars. I wonder if that's what this nomination convention is going to look like from the Maine Democratic Party.
It will be. It's something I'm going to be watching with so much interest. It's going to be fascinating and chaos, and it's going to be the establishment versus the wacko far left progressives just duking it out. Because I mean, that's ultimately what that primary came down to between Mills and Platner is the establishment Democrats that are with all their baggage and corrupt, or the alleged corrupt claims that have come forward. The Maine Wire's done extensive reporting on all that. Go see what Steve Robinson's wrote about it. We can't get into all that right now, but it's one of those things where the Democrats are lost at sea, and Republicans seem to at least be going in one direction. I mean, how are you feeling going into the general coming up, especially in the governor's race? Because that's the big thing. I'm a Granite Stater. I was born and raised in Maine, though. Is I would love to get get that turned back around because Maine really needs to start turning their boat in the right direction in order to not continue to have the same failures that Vermont is seeing.
And something to be said about these establishment Democrats is they're claiming to have the solutions to the problems that they have created over the last 8 years while in power in Augusta. If I look out my window in my office right now, I can see the Capitol building, and that's where they've all been hanging out for years, creating the problems that our state is facing. And now they're trying to claim that they're going to have the solutions for it. But as for going into the general, we are confident because independents, Republicans, and even, more center of the line or even just common sense Democrats are looking at what, Democratic leaders have done to the state. And they're saying, we got to change what we're doing. We're on the wrong track. We got to turn around. Well, the Democrats don't have the solution. They look to the Maine Republican Party, and we have actionable items about how to reduce electricity costs, how to incentivize businesses and doctors and pediatricians to come into our state and to start their practice this year and to grow their small businesses. And they're looking to the Republican Party for the solutions, and I do believe that we have them. So as for the U.S. Senate race, regardless of who our opponent is, whether it was Graham Platner, but now it looks like it might be Shanna Bellows, Troy Jackson, Paige Ladd, Jordan Wood, whoever ends up coming out on top in 2 weeks, I'm not worried about it because I love the senator. Susan Collins' campaign slogan is "Our Senator." She has done an incredible job representing Maine in Washington, D.C. Whether Republicans like to talk about it or not, we do have a bit of a swing state and very independent minded. And, that's just the nature of someone who lived in Maine is, we have to be very practical. So Susan Collins does an incredible job providing for all Mainers, whether you're up in Aroostook County, whether you're down in York County, over in Somerset, over in Washington. She is on the Appropriations Committee providing for Mainers. So we're all very grateful for that. And Maine would be lost without Susan Collins. So we're not panicking. We're not worried about it. She's a strong candidate. She's beloved in Maine. So I believe she's going to carry through very well into November. But you also asked about the gubernatorial race. And Bobby Charles went into primary day with a lot of support. And he have ranked choice voting, which, I mean, don't get me started
It's a whole other can of worms.
at all. But he is the candidate that came out on top. And he has a lot of supporters that are very, very excited about him. I personally am very excited for his race to continue. Obviously, we went through the whole primary, and now we're in the general. His campaign slogan is "Cut taxes, cut crime, cut the nonsense." Let's be reasonable, let's be practical, let's be pragmatic again in a state of Maine, where we just need to get back to zero. We need to so we can start heading in that positive direction again. We need to get out of the negative into the positive, and Bobby Charles is a great leader to do that because of his experience.
Awesome. Yeah, and what did he do before this campaign? I'm not overly familiar with him.
So he worked in a couple different administrations in Washington, D.C. as a federal investigator, but then also he spent some time as a a naval officer and overseas, especially after 9/11, getting things organized and being a leader and, fighting federal crime. And he did that for a long time in Washington, D.C. So he knows what it's like to what the process of government looks like. And he's very familiar with that. But at the same time, as he's not a Democrat Augusta insider, he, unlike his opponent, Hannah Pingree, he didn't create the problem in Maine. He just has the solutions as opposed to and Hannah Pingree says, hey, here are the solutions for Maine, but I'm not going to trust Hannah Pingree to fix the problem that she created. It just doesn't make any sense.
So looking at this is probably all a mess because of the ranked choice voting situation, but the votes for Pingree versus Charles, when you look at it, she has twice as many people who voted in the primary for her, according to the final roll when it came to that. What does the Maine Republican Party need to do to make sure to motivate voters to be at the ballot box on election day and vote Republican?
Yeah, so I would like to point out that the Maine Republican, primary, we had some of the highest turnout that we've ever had. It was like first or second that we've ever had. And that's the primary did go well for us. And the strategy of the candidates was to find out who normally votes in primaries and then convince them to vote for him and prove that they were the best candidate. And that's how the Republican primary turned out. But in the Democrat primary, you had more candidates, there was more primaries, and there was way more money spent. A lot of out-of-state money, really. So you had 5 gubernatorial candidates and several congressional candidates spending a lot of money to get out the vote and to motivate people to go to the polls, as opposed to convince them why they're the best candidate. So they had a major get out the vote effort for the primary, and we didn't necessarily need that in our Republican primary. We wanted the best candidate to win, so we let them show who they were, and they did that. But that's not to say that the Republican primary or the Republican Party can't turn out in November. And I am very confident that we're going to have a high turnout in November, because there are a lot of independents, there are a lot of Republicans and even Democrats who are just completely fed up with not having any spare money in their wallets and not having any wiggle room in their budgets.
It's one of those things also when you look at electorally, if you're having a party that's on the rise, you don't necessarily have the huge numbers when it comes down to the primary vote. It goes down to the general, because not everyone is a registered one party or the other, especially in New England. So it's a matter of making sure people show up on election day. So please go and vote on election day, people.
And while we're having the discussion about get out the vote, I would like to talk about our new program that we have that's launching, basically this week and going into next week. I didn't try to promote this with the media this week because I knew that it was just going to get lost in the sauce amongst all the Graham Platner drama. But for weeks and months now, we've been recruiting volunteers and activating Republicans for what we call neighborhood navigators. And it's a get out the vote volunteer program specifically targeted at the 90,000 low propensity voters in Maine. And if someone's not familiar with the term low propensity, it's basically someone who, votes once every 8 years, once every 4 years. Maybe they only vote in the president races. Maybe they only vote when the governor and is up to be voted on. But we want to activate them, and people will respond when they're called to. So we have this neighborhood navigators program that's just barely, on the cusp of being completely ready to go and launch. And it's going to be an app on people's phones where they can go to their 50 to 100 closest neighbors just in their neighborhood, across the street, behind their house, and say, hey, this is who I'm voting for. I'm voting for Robbie Charles. I'm voting for Susan Collins. Have you voted yet? And following up on those people. So we actually have a targeted program partnering with the RNC and the Maine Republican Party to turn out low propensity voters in Maine. And I'm ecstatic about it. We have a grassroots chair that's ahead of it. Our chairman is bouncing off the walls, excited for this. And I'm very confident that it's going to be successful to bring out low propensity voters on top of the get out the vote efforts that we have in, for general Republicans and independents.
Yeah, 100%. It comes down to the grassroots. I mean, it's not like it was 30 years ago where it was all TV and radio ads and newspaper ads and things of that nature. It's people are getting bombarded every day by 15 million messages and ads and things of that nature. They need to have their buddy next door say, "Hey, you're going to be voting for such and such, right?" And it's like, "No, who's that?" Because they don't necessarily know all the candidates. There's a lot of people on these ballots, and it's especially important. We say pay attention to your local initiatives, also your municipal initiatives, because that's very important. But that exactly. It's so important. It's vital. It's one thing that the Republicans, I think, have been getting a lot better at in recent years, and apps and things of that nature that motivates people to do it and gamifies it and things of that nature are hugely important. We got just a few minutes left here. I want you to talk about your podcast, Wicked Smart.
Yeah, so I actually just a couple days ago kind of did like a mini, celebration of 1 year working at the party. I've been working here since July 7th of last year as the communications director. And I was reflecting over the things I've been able to accomplish and what we've been able to accomplish since I came on board, including, our growth on social media, on YouTube, but then also opportunities I've had for training and for career growth. And one of those things that I've been ecstatic to learn and, you know, you would know this because you host a podcast, but my boss basically sat me down one day and he said, I think that the Maine GOP should have a podcast. And I was like, oh yeah, I'll just start a podcast, easy peasy, as if, that's how simple it is that you just throw up a camera and a microphone. But there's actually a lot that goes into it. And over the last year, I started the Wicked Smart podcast. And if you talk to a Mainer, anytime I say Wicked Smart, they will laugh and say Wicked Smart, because the reality is that Mainers will say smart as smart because that's just kind of how the Maine accent works. But it's the Wicked Smart Maine GOP podcast. And over the course of the fall and the primary, I was able to have each of the Maine Republican, big race candidates come onto the podcast. So I did 10 episodes with the gubernatorial candidates. I was able to have Paula Page, Ron Russell, and Joshua Petchowitz on. They were congressional candidates. We're now at 20 plus episodes for the Wicked Smart podcast. Our YouTube followers has increased by 400% since I started the podcast. And, looking into the summer, I'm going to continue to have people who are political strategists, who are candidates, who are invested in Republican politics coming onto the podcast and talking about why Republicans have the good ideas, why we have the solutions, but then also just individually why you should vote for people like Susan Collins, why you should vote for people like Paula Page. So we're on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts. The easiest way to find any of those would be mainegop.com/podcast, but we're on Spotify as Wicked Smart Podcast and also YouTube under the Maine GOP YouTube channel.
Awesome. All right. So if people want, that's awesome. So that's great to see. All the stuff that actually gets the faces out there and talking like human beings is always fantastic. So please be sure to check out the podcast. I'll put it in the episode description too. If people want to get involved with the Maine GOP, the Republican Party, if they want to figure out who your candidates are and things like that, what do you suggest people do?
I'm actually really glad that you asked that. Another skill that I've learned at the Maine GOP, and this is not something that I learned in school, was kind of website management. And so actually, as we were waiting for the primary to wrap up, I was building a website page for mainegop.com just for this. So if people go to mainegop.com/election 2026, or you can find it on our homepage, there's several tabs. We have a volunteer calendar. We have applications for field staff jobs. We still have a couple of those that we need to fill out. But then also we have a Meet the Candidate spot where we have bio information about the senator and Governor Paula Page and the other congressional candidates and for Bobby Charles. And there's also that Neighborhood Navigators sign up link. And that is the pre-sign up link. So anyone who, if you think you only have a couple hours, every couple weeks, that's enough to reach 50, 100, 150 voters. So if you think, there might be a couple weekends where you would have a couple hours, like we will take any help that we can get. We would be happy to have someone on, train them. So if you just go to mainegop.com, sign up for Neighborhood Navigators, that's the best place to volunteer. But then there's also some links to some of our other things on that website as well.
And listen, I'm in New Hampshire and I'm doing my part. You do your part too. So get out there and learn about these candidates. Go out and vote. Kristina Parker, thank you so much for joining me. She's communications director at the Maine Republican Party. Thanks so much for joining me. All right, newenglandtake.com to get more from the show. Big thank you to Porcupine Coffee Roasting. Use code NETAKE. Subscribe, join, share, email me, aj@newenglandtake.com. I respond to all the emails, all the hate mail, anything of that nature. Send me your opinions, your guest ideas. It's been awesome to interact with the audience. It's a great way to do it. Thank you, WKXL, for picking up the program. Next up over there is Facing the Future. GraniteGrock.com, Concord TV, huge support of all these local outlets, and you should check them out too. This has been New England Take. I'm your host, AJ Kirsten. We'll talk to you soon.